The moment she saw the photograph of her dog slipped under her door, she knew they'd been inside her home. And that meant one thing: her time was running out. But what if the only thing standing between the truth and the people trying to bury it was an interpreter? A woman who'd spent her whole career translating other people's stories, now forced to tell her own before she disappears like all the others. This is the story of the interpreter of truth. Stay with me, because once you hear it, you'll never look at power the same way again. And if you love real stories that hit hard, make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. I was always told my job was to stand between two shores, carrying words from one language to another like a ferryman rowing passengers across a river. But sometimes, the river turns black and deep, swirling with undercurrents I can't see, pulling me toward places I don't want to go. That night, the wind slipped through the cracked interrogation room window. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing pale light across tense faces. The woman sitting in front of me looked 10 years older than the age on her file hair in knots, an old jacket streaked with mud, her thin hands clasped so tightly I thought they might break. "I'll tell you," she whispered, her eyes fixed on nothing. "But no one's going to believe me." I nodded, translating her words into English for the officer leaning against the wall. He didn't bother to write anything down, just smirked like he'd heard a fairy tale. That was the first moment I understood. Truth doesn't always die because it's hidden. Sometimes it dies because the people in power simply don't want to hear it. My name is Isabella Reyes. I'm 32, living in a cramped apartment on the south side, where ambulance sirens are the city's alarm clock. I was born here, to the sound of New Year's Eve gunfire and the smell of fresh tortillas my mother made in our tiny kitchen. My father's a retired U.S. Army veteran from Afghanistan, carrying wounds you can see and shadows you can't. My mother came from Guatemala, legal papers, years of taxes paid, and still spent her life being asked, "Where are you really from?" As if darker skin was a counterfeit passport. I learned English at the same time I learned Spanish, and that skill led me to the police department as an interpreter. I told myself if I couldn't change the system, at least I could help those who had no voice be heard. But the truth is, language isn't the biggest barrier in this world. Power is. My desk is on the second floor of the precinct, just a few steps from the interrogation rooms. Out the window, I see the narrow street below, patrol cars sliding past, their red and blue lights flashing against the old brick walls. Smell of burnt coffee from the communal pot lingers in the air, mixing with paper dust and sweat. Most cases I worked were routine store thefts, bar fights, neighbor disputes. But some never made the news. Their files locked away, names erased and key testimony gone, as if it never existed. We interpreters aren't allowed to keep copies of anything. Notes must be turned in. Even small mistakes can mean the end of our contracts. I used to think that was just standard procedure. Until today. Her name was Maria Lopez, 27, from Honduras. She'd crossed the southern border in the back of a freight truck, no papers, no family, nothing but a small bag and a silver necklace. As the officer asked his questions, I translated Maria's answers, word for word, breath for breath. She spoke of men in police uniforms escorting her and others to an abandoned house, locking the doors, turning it into a stopover for a trafficking network. They were paid in cash to look the other way while trucks full of women and children vanished into the night. As I spoke her words, I felt my own heart pounding, not from fear for myself, but from the realization that if this was true, the people sworn to protect us were the ones holding the keys to the cage. The officer scribbled lazily in his notebook, then stopped and asked in a flat voice, "Any proof?" Maria went quiet. I went quiet. We both knew in cases like this, proof isn't what they're looking for. The interview ended without ceremony. Maria was escorted to the immigration holding cell. I stood in the long hallway alone, listening to the steady echo of boots on tile, like a funeral drumbeat. Part of me wanted to forget it. It wasn't my job. I wasn't a cop. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a hero. But the way Maria's eyes locked on mine before they took her away, the silent plea for someone, anyone, to believe her made it impossible to sleep that night. I knew if I stayed quiet, this story would die. And if I spoke up, I might be the next one to disappear. Rain hammered the roof that night. I sat in my small kitchen, next to my father's retired canine ranger. He lay curled on the floor, lifting his head every so often, sensing the unease rolling off me. On the table was my small notebook, filled with every word Maria had said, punctuation, pauses, even the tremor in her voice. My hands shook as I slid it into a manila envelope, sealed it, and scrawled the address for internal affairs. Tomorrow, I'd send it out. I didn't know if it was the right decision. But I knew one thing: if I didn't, I'd have to live the rest of my life with the taste of my own cowardice. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I carried it to the blue mailbox on the corner under the busted streetlight, and held it too long in my hand, my breath fogging in the cold. I told myself it was just a piece of mail, the way you tell yourself a bridge is just steel and concrete, as you step onto it and stare down into black water. I slid it through the slot and listened for the dull thud inside, then stood there like the box might talk back. It didn't. It swallowed what I gave it and kept its secrets. The next morning, the precinct smelled like wet wool and old coffee. I climbed the stairs two at a time, Ranger pacing at my heel until the desk sergeant waved him off with a half smile and a good boy, like we were both pets. My desk was as I left its stack of forms, a cup with my name written in Sharpie, a taped photo of my mother standing in front of a jacaranda tree in full bloom. I signed in, checked my messages, and waited for the call that would tell me someone somewhere had actually read what I sent. It never came. By noon, I walked down to records. A fan chopped the air in slow beats. A woman in a cardigan sat behind a glass window, stamping dates on files with the calm of a surgeon. I filled out the request slip and slid it under. She took it, typed a while, found it the screen, typed again. "I'm sorry," she said without looking at me. "There's nothing under that incident number." "That can't be right." I kept my voice steady. "It was entered yesterday afternoon." She pursed her lips like she didn't like arguing. "Not in this system. Maybe it's sealed?" Then it would say sealed. She shook her head gently. "It says nothing." Her eyes flicked past mine to something over my shoulder, and I knew she wanted me to step away. I did. The hallway felt narrower than before. I stood there, palms damp, while a pair of officers walked by, still laughing about some joke, one of them glancing at my face and letting his smile dim a notch. He leaned toward his friend, said something I didn't catch. They kept walking, back upstairs. I told myself not to panic. I opened my drawer to pull out my notebook, my own notes, my own handwriting, the only proof I had that yesterday happened. The way I remembered it. The drawer slid open easily. The notebook wasn't there. I froze. Paper clips. A mint I never ate. The corner of an old birthday card. No notebook. I checked the other drawers. Nothing. I sat down hard. My tongue felt too big in my mouth. I retraced my steps in my head. Kitchen table. Envelope. Mailbox. But the notebook, my copy, had never left the drawer. I kept it there because I had learned the hard way that home wasn't always safe. I had written every word she said in type block letters, small enough to hide in plain sight. Now plain sight was empty. When I stood up, the room tilted. I told myself I might have misremembered, that it was at home after all, that I was catastrophizing because the world had trained me to expect the worst. I grabbed my coat, signed out, and walked the 6 blocks to my building without feeling my feet. The hallway smelled like bleach and fried plantains. In my apartment, I went straight to the bedroom, to the shoebox under the bed where I kept old bills and a tangle of lanyards from conferences no one remembers. I lifted the lid like you lift a bandage. The notebook wasn't there either. The silence around me felt purposeful. Ranger padded in from the kitchen, nails clicking on the floor, and nudged my knee like he always did when a thunderstorm rolled in. I buried my fingers in the scruff around his neck and realized my hands were shaking so hard I was rubbing heat into him. I called internal affairs. A receptionist with a voice like a locked door told me someone would return my call. No one did. I called again, voicemail. I left my number twice and the words urgent and time-sensitive, because I had learned that every bureaucracy pretends to care about clocks, so you have to speak in clock language. By evening, the rain had started up again, hands drumming on the roof. I made arroz con palo the way my mother taught me, because cooking is a kind of prayer. I chopped onions too forcefully and cried over the pan and told myself it was the onion's fault. The phone sat on the counter like a disapproving aunt. It buzzed once at 8:13, unknown number. Ms. Reyes? A man asked. This is Officer Shepard with Immigration Enforcement. We're calling to inform you that the detainee you worked with yesterday, a Ms. Lopez, has been processed and repatriated. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against tile. Repatriated. She has an active complaint. That's outside our purview. She's a material witness, I said, heat rising in my throat. She named officers. You can't just... Ma'am, he said, like he was tired. Given her status and the risk assessment, the decision was made. She's already on a plane. I could hear a television in the background of his office, a play-by-play of some game, the cheer of a crowd. There was no cheering in my kitchen. The call ended with a click. I stared at the phone until it went dark and reflected my face back at me, small and afraid and furious. The knock at my door came just after midnight. 3 little raps, polite as a neighbor. Ranger's ears went up. He didn't bark at much, but he stood, muscles tight. I walked to the peephole, pressed my eye to the fisheye world. The hallway was empty. Far off, someone's TV laughed. I opened the door a crack. Nothing. I stepped out, looked left, right. The carpet was damp near the stairwell from a leak no one ever fixed. I was about to go back inside when I saw the envelope. Manila, unmarked, no stamp. I carried it into the kitchen, aware of the way my heartbeat had moved from my chest into my throat. Inside was a photo, not of me, of my mother, 30 years younger, walking me to school, my backpack bigger than my torso. The picture was taken from inside a car. The dashboard cut a dark line across the bottom edge. I turned it over. Nothing written there. At the bottom of the envelope, something slid. A single bullet, dull and heavy as a tooth. For a long moment, all I heard was Ranger breathing. I set the bullet back in the envelope and put both in the freezer, because fear makes you do ridiculous things, like try to contain it in a place meant for leftovers. I leaned my forehead against the refrigerator door and stayed like that until the chill spread. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with Ranger's head in my lap and listened to the building creak like an old ship. Twice, a car idled in the alley behind my window, headlights cutting through the blinds. At dawn, I made coffee that tasted like burnt pennies and told myself the world always looks worse with no sleep. On my way to the precinct, I noticed the same gray sedan I'd seen 2 days before parked across the street. A man inside with a high baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look up when I passed. I've learned that the most dangerous men don't always stare. Sometimes they pretend they haven't seen you at all. Inside, I went straight to the lieutenant, a man who wore his uniform like a costume. I told him the witness had been deported. I told him the file was gone. I told him about the envelope. He listened with the expression of someone waiting for a bus, then folded his hands and said, "You're emotional, Reyes. You know how stressful this job is." "I'm not emotional," I said calmly, and looked down to see my hands shaking again. "I'm reporting misconduct." "Then report it through the appropriate channels." I did. He spread his hands, a gesture of helplessness I didn't buy. "Then wait. I think you know what happened to that file," I said. I hadn't planned to say it until I heard it in my own voice, steady as a level. His eyes didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw flickered. "This conversation is over," he said, and stood, which is what people do when they want to turn your body into a problem. I left before my body could become one. On the sidewalk, the cold hit me like a slap. I walked without direction until my feet decided for me and took me to a storefront with a hand-painted sign in the window, "Ross Community Law." The bell above the door rang when I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled like printer ink and lemon. "Cleaner," a woman at the reception desk raised her eyebrows. "You okay?" I must have looked like I wasn't. "Is Evelyn Ross here?" I asked. I need someone who doesn't answer to them." She studied me a beat too long, then nodded toward a closed door. "Give me a second." I sat on a cracked leather chair and stared at a poster on the wall that read, "Rights aren't given. They're demanded." The door opened and a woman in a black blazer stepped out, her hair tucked behind one ear, eyes sharp and not unkind. "Ross," she said, "come on back." Her office was small, cluttered with manila folders and a coffee mug that said "Lawyer Up" in peeling letters. She didn't ask me to start at the beginning. She asked me to start at the moment something changed. I told her about Maria, about the abandoned house and the uniforms, about records, about the phone call, about the envelope in my freezer. While I spoke, she didn't look away, and that was the first kindness I'd been offered since the mailbox. "Do you have anything left?" she asked when I was done. "Anything they didn't take?" I shook my head before I remembered the thing I'd almost forgotten. The old digital recorder in my glove compartment. I'd used it when I first started, before the department issued their own, because I didn't trust technology to be there when I needed it most. I'd recorded the interview for my notes, telling myself I'd delete it later, because rules exist for good reasons until they don't. "I might," I said, in my car. Her mouth tilted, not quite a smile. "Let's go." On the walk, I told her about my father, how he had stopped sleeping after he came home, how Ranger was the only thing that could get him to sit still long enough to stop shaking during thunderstorms. I didn't mean to tell her that. It is strange what we offer strangers when our lives start sliding. We reached my car. The windshield glinted with a layer of salt spray from the plows. I unlocked the door and sat behind the wheel, hands suddenly clumsy as I tugged at the glove box latch. It stuck, then gave with a sigh. I reached past a map of the city and a pair of old sunglasses and curled my fingers around cold plastic. The recorder was where I left it, scuffed and scratched, the little screen dark. I pressed power. It blinked. Awake. I scrolled to the last file and hit play. The car filled with Maria's voice, small and clear and brave. She said the names, she said the dates. She said the color of a ring one of them wore, and the exact street where a van always parked on Tuesdays. My own voice floated in the background, translating steady, neutral, the way they trained us to. The Evelyn's eyes flicked to mine. "We make copies," she said. "Immediately, then we move fast." "How fast?" "Before they realize you still have teeth." We drove to her office, heads bent over the recorder like it was a newborn. She plugged it into her computer, copied the file, then dragged it onto 2 flash drives, then a third. She emailed a copy to an encrypted address with a subject line that meant nothing to anyone but her. She handed me one of the drives and slid another into a hollowed-out law book on the shelf. The recorder she tucked into her inside pocket. "I'm filing for a protective order," she said, already typing. "For you. You'll give a statement. We'll demand the department preserve all records related to the Danny, to the incident. Address to any officers named. We'll notify the press." The word press made my stomach drop. "Won't that make it worse?" Yes, she said, and also better. She stopped typing, looked at me for a long, quiet second. There was something in her gaze I didn't expect to find. Not pity, not even sympathy. Recognition, maybe. The look two people share when they see the same storm coming from different horizons. You're not alone in this, she said softly, as if we had both agreed to try on a sentence and see how it fit. I nodded. I didn't realize until that moment how badly I needed those 4 words. Not because they changed the danger, but because they made the danger feel survivable. Outside, the sky went from iron to pewter. We set a time for me to come back the next day with everything else. I could remember every detail I hadn't written down. On my way home, I spotted the gray sedan again, half a block behind me, then gone when I turned the corner. I cut down an alley that smelled like motor oil and oranges, because the produce stand always tossed peels back there. A man in a navy jacket stood under the overhang, holding a cardboard sign, "Homeless Vet. Anything helps." His beard was trimmed. Eyes bright under the grime, I dug in my pocket and found a 10. When I handed it to him, he said, "You got someone tailing you." I blinked. "You saw?" He angled his head toward the street. Same car sat across from the shelter last night. 92 or 93 Caprice. Bashed rear left quarter panel. Cop car in an earlier life. He shrugged at my surprise. "You learn to read what's hunting you. What's your name?" I asked. "Marcus," he said, straightening, pride threading through the word. "Used to be Staff Sergeant Marcus King. Now I'm hey man outside the grocery store." He scratched Ranger behind the ear, a habit the dog accepted like a benediction. I had to stop myself from apologizing for the world. "Thank you, Marcus." "Keep your head on a swivel, miss," he said, mock cheerful, like he was telling me to enjoy my day. "And tuck your hair in your collar. Makes it harder for someone to grab." I walked the last block fast. In the lobby, Mrs. Patel from 3B was lecturing her son about homework. Someone had taped a flyer to the elevator door. "Community watch meeting, 7 p.m. Tuesday. We needed one for more than porches. Upstairs." I let us in and locked the deadbolt and the chain. The apartment smelled like last night's onions and something else, trace smoke, faint as a memory. I checked every room like Ranger taught me to. Corners first, behind curtains. Closet doors open wide. Nothing out of place that wasn't always out of place. On the kitchen table, my mother's jacaranda photo lay face down. I hadn't left it like that. Beneath it was a single sheet of paper torn from a legal pad. 3 words, block letters, no signature. "Stop translating lies." I sat down because my knees had decided on their own. Ranger pressed into my leg. I folded the paper gently, like folding a shirt at a stranger's house, and slid it into a drawer. The urge to call my mother rose hot and immediate, to hear her voice hem my fear in. But I knew she would hear something in mine and not sleep for weeks. And she had carried enough. The sun went down behind the buildings, washing the sky in an ugly pink. I stood at the window and counted headlights and made bargains with myself the way children do. If the next car is red, everything will be fine. The next car wasn't red. It was the gray sedan, easing to a stop across the street. I turned off the lamp and let the room go soft. I stood to the side of the window and watched, the way my father taught me, so if someone looked up, they wouldn't see a face framed in light. The sedan idled. After a minute, the passenger door opened and a man got out, hat low, hands in his pockets. He didn't look at my building. He looked at the sky, like he had time. Then he crossed the street and disappeared into the bodega on the corner. I thought of Maria's voice in my car. How quietly brave it sounded. I thought of the bullet in my freezer and the softness of Evelyn's, "You're not alone." I thought of Marcus, who could see what hunted him. I rested my forehead against the cool glass and told the fear to make itself smaller, just for the night. When the phone rang, I jumped, then let it ring twice more so I wouldn't sound desperate. I recognized the number. "Evelyn." Pack a bag, she said without greeting. Her voice was brisk, urgent. Just overnight. Don't use your credit card. Can you be at my office in an hour? What happened? A judge who owes me a favor called, she said. We've got a hearing first thing in the morning. And there's a reporter who's been waiting to make enemies in all the right places. I looked at the window, at the street, at the gray car. I thought of my father's medals in a shoebox and the way Ranger steadied himself before a storm. I thought of all the voices I'd translated that vanished into paper dust and trash bags and flights to nowhere. I'll be there, I said, and hung up, and went to the closet to pull out the small black bag I kept for trips I never took. I packed it fast. Jeans, a sweater, my mother's rosary in a pocket I almost never used. I unplugged the lamp by the window and left the one in the hallway on. A trick my father taught me so the apartment looked occupied from 2 angles. I clipped Ranger's leash to his collar. He looked up at me, eyes old and kind and ready. At the door, I paused, listening. The building bones creaked their familiar complaints. Distant sirens layered over each other like rounds in a hymn. I slipped into the hallway and locked the door. Behind me, on the landing, I met our neighbor's kid Tasha, 11, braids neat, backpack heavier than she was. She held the door for me like a small queen. Hi, Miss Reyes, she said. Ranger. Hey, Tasha, I said. You doing okay? She looked down at her sneakers. They said I couldn't play forward, she muttered. Solid maybe. Defense would suit you. And then they gave forward to Becky, who's slow as a toaster. Who said that? Coach, she said. He said I was too aggressive. I thought of the word they use on girls with brown skin when they refuse to be quiet. You know what my dad says? I said. He says aggressive is what they call you before they call you captain. She smiled without meaning to. I like your dad. Me too, I said, and hoped it would always be true. We stepped outside. The cold wrapped around my face like cloth. The gray sedan sat under the streetlight, its windshield staring at me with blank eyes. I tucked my hair into my collar the way Marcus told me and walked Ranger down the block, not looking at the car. When we turned the corner, I let out a breath. I didn't know I'd been holding. The city smelled like rain and fried dough and gasoline. Somewhere close, a church bell chimed the hour. I didn't know yet that in the morning, the courthouse doors would swing open to cameras and microphones, and a phalanx of uniforms with their faces made of stone. I didn't know that the prosecutor would pretend not to know me and then know me intimately with the wrong pronouns. I didn't know the reporter's name or that when he shook my hand, he'd hold it an extra beat, not in a way that made me nervous, but like he was anchoring himself to this moment as much as I was. All I knew was that we were moving, finally, in a direction that wasn't running. And sometimes, that's the only victory you get before the storm hits. The courthouse loomed over me like an old ship anchored to the street, all stone and shadows. Evelyn walked ahead, her heels clicking on the wet pavement, her blazer pulled tight against the morning wind. Ranger stayed in the car with Marcus, who had insisted on coming just to watch the watchers. As we climbed the steps, the air changed. The murmur of traffic faded into a hum of voices, camera shutters snapping, the whine of a news crew's generator. A dozen reporters stood clustered near the entrance, microphones poised like flowers bending toward the sun. They turned as we approached. Miss Reyes, someone called. Is it true you have a recording implicating? Evelyn's hand was suddenly on my back, steering me forward. No comments before the hearing, she said, her voice crisp enough to slice through. Air. Inside, the marble floor caught the cold light filtering through tall windows. The security checkpoint beeped at every other person, but when I stepped through, the guard waved me on without looking. That small dismissal tightened something in my chest. We found our seats near the front of the gallery. Across the aisle, a row of uniforms sat in perfect posture, their hats resting on their knees. They didn't look at me, but I could feel the weight of their stillness. The man in the center, Captain Rosselli, had the kind of face that smiled easily in public service ads. Today it was carved from granite. The prosecutor, a wiry man in a blue tie, leaned into Evelyn before the judge arrived. "You understand the political cost of this, right?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "You understand the human cost of not doing it?" He sighed, sat back, and rifled through his folder like it could answer for him. When the judge finally entered, the room rose. I stayed standing a heartbeat longer, not out of defiance, but because my knees weren't ready to lock. We sat, and the formalities rolled over me in a wash of legalese until my name was called. I walked to the witness stand, my heels clicking in time with my pulse. The clerk swore me in, and I took my seat, the microphone rising like a question between us. Double quotes, Ms. Reyes, the prosecutor began. "Can you state your occupation for the record?" "I'm a certified Spanish-English interpreter for the city police department." He nodded. "And in that capacity, did you interpret for a detainee named Maria Lopez on the date of March 14th? "Yes. What did she tell you during that interview?" I took a breath, steadying my voice. "She described being transported by men in police uniforms to an abandoned house used as a staging point for human trafficking. She provided names, dates, and locations." I translated her words into English for the officer present. "And you recorded this interview?" "Yes. Is this a copy of that recording?" He pressed a button on the court's audio system. Maria's voice filled the room, trembling but unbroken. I heard my own voice layered over hers, steady and neutral. As she named names, I could feel the air tighten. Someone behind me shifted in their seat. When it ended, the prosecutor looked to the judge. "Your Honor, we submit this as exhibit." The defense attorney, a man with silver hair and an easy smirk, stood. "Your Honor, I object to the admissibility of this recording." My client was not present, nor was the detainee under oath, and the interpreter's recollection is subject to objection overruled, the judge said. "The recording stays." The silver-haired man's eyes flicked to mine, cold as coins. Evelyn stepped in with her own questions, each one building on the last. She made me walk the court through the process of interpreting, the accuracy required, the ethics. She made it clear that the words I translated weren't mine to alter or invent. By the time she finished, the jury, half of whom had been avoiding my eyes, were watching me like they were starting to understand the stakes. Then the defense had their turn. "Ms. Reyes," he said, strolling toward the stand. "You seem very invested in this case." "I'm invested in telling the truth." "A noble sentiment," he said with a thin smile. "But isn't it true you've had disagreements with members of the department before?" "I've had disagreements when I saw misconduct." "So you have a bias against law enforcement?" "No," I said. "I have a bias against crime, even when it wears a badge." That drew a murmur from the gallery. The judge's gavel came down once. He tried another angle, bringing up my mother's immigration history, implying I was sympathetic to undocumented individuals and therefore unreliable. Evelyn objected. The judge sustained, but the damage was in the air. When I stepped down, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I sat beside Evelyn, who leaned over and whispered, "You held." Outside the courthouse, the press surged. Evelyn handled most of the questions, but one reporter with a bright scarf leaned toward me. "Ms. Reyes, aren't you afraid?" I looked. At her, at the microphones, at the lenses trained on my face. "Of course I'm afraid," I said. "But fear's not the same as silence." The flashbulbs popped. That night, the retaliation began in earnest. First, it was the call to rings, then dead air. Then the message slipped under my apartment door. A Polaroid of Ranger, taken from across the street. On the back, in block letters, "Nice dog." I sat on the couch with the photo in my lap, the court's echoes still in my ears. I thought about Maria, wherever they'd left her. I thought about Evelyn, already planning the next move. And I thought about the men in that front row, their stillness sharper than any threat they could speak out loud. The war had stepped out of the shadows. And it was looking straight at me. The Polaroid sat on my kitchen table all night, face down. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, and I couldn't stand to look at it. Ranger slept curled at my feet, but his ears twitched at every soundpipe's groaning. Wind at the windows, a distant siren. He was restless, and so was I around. 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring twice, then answered. Reyes? The voice was low, male, the kind of voice that has spent a lifetime speaking in corners. You want to keep that dog alive, you stop playing hero. I stayed silent. Sometimes silence makes people fill the space. He didn't. He just hung up. Didn't go back to sleep. At dawn, I went to Ross's office. Evelyn was already there, sleeves rolled up, hair in a loose knot, coffee gone cold beside her. She looked up when I came in. You didn't sleep, she said. I got a call, threat, and a photo of Ranger. She exhaled sharply, shoved her coffee aside. They're pushing you to break, which means they're worried. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were grainy photocopies, property records, phone logs, patrol schedules. This is the address Maria gave us, she said. The abandoned house. Only it's not abandoned, not officially. It's owned by a shell company tied to a retired deputy named Harlan Cates. And look here. She tapped a page of phone logs. Calls from that property to a burner registered 3 days before her interview. Guess who the burner belongs to? I stared at the name. Captain Rosselli. They're sloppy, I said. They're arrogant, she corrected. Sloppy is when you make mistakes. Arrogance is thinking no one will dare to look. Before I could answer, there was a knock at her office door. Marcus stepped in, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his surplus coat. I saw your friends again, he said. Gray Caprice. They were parked 2 blocks from your building at midnight. I walked past slow one guy in the driver's seat. Didn't bother hiding the earpiece. Cops? I asked. Or people who want to look like them, he said. Either way, they're patient. Evelyn's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned. Court just moved our next hearing up. 48 hours. Somebody wants to get this over with before we dig deeper. I leaned back in my chair. Then we dig now. We split up Evelyn to subpoena utility records, Marcus to watch my apartment, me to go to the address on the property record. It was in the industrial district, between a shuttered warehouse and a lot full of rusted shipping containers. The house was squat, gray, its windows boarded. A chain-link fence sagged at the corners. I parked a block away and walked the rest. The fence had a padlock, but the side gate hung loose, chain cut. I stepped through. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something sweeter rotting fruit, maybe inside. The floors were bare plywood. In the back room, I found a folding table and 2 chairs. On the table was an ashtray with a cigarette still half burned, the ash frozen mid-fall. Someone had been here recently. I pulled out my phone, took photos. In the corner, under a tarp, was a plastic storage bin. I flipped it open. Inside were manila envelopes, thick with papers, and a small black notebook. I opened the notebook, handwritten. Names, dates, amounts of cash, initials that matched badges I'd seen at the precinct. I took photos of every page, heart hammering. That's when I heard the crunch of gravel outside. I killed my phone screen and ducked behind the table. Boots on the porch. 2 voices, male. One laughed. The front door creaked open. Check the back, one said. I slipped toward the kitchen. Ranger's training in my mind, stay low, move quiet, eyes first. I was halfway to the side door when a beam of light cut across the room. Hey! I bolted, pushing through the door into the yard, chain link scraping my jacket. I didn't look back until I was in my car, engine roaring. In the rearview mirror, a figure stood at the gate, watching, phone to his ear. I drove straight to Evelyn's. She listened without interrupting, then took my phone and dumped the photos onto her laptop. "This is enough to blow it open," she said. "If we can keep it safe for 48 hours. Safe how? Multiple copies, distributed, and one where they'll never think to look." She handed me a flash drive. "Give this to Marcus. He knows where to stash things." When I found him outside my building, he took the drive without a word, slid it into a zippered pocket inside his coat. "Don't call me," he said. "If you need me, I'll find you." That night, I packed a bag and stayed at Evelyn's. We worked until 2 a.m., piecing together timelines, matching initials to badge numbers. Every so often, I'd hear Ranger shift on the floor beside me, his breathing steady, grounding me. Around 3, Evelyn's secure line rang. She answered, listened, then looked at me. "Our witness? The one you didn't know you had? He's ready to talk." "Who?" She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "One of their own. We met him in the back room of a diner off Highway 17. Kind of place where the coffee tastes like the pot's never been washed, and the booths remember every conversation they've heard." The neon open sign flickered, throwing pink light across the window blinds. Evelyn had insisted we park 2 blocks away and come in separately. He was already there when I arrived, a man in his late 40s, hair shaved close, plain windbreaker, zipped up to the throat. He didn't look at me right away. His hands were wrapped around a chipped coffee mug like it was the only thing anchoring him to the table. "This is Sergeant Paul Navarro," Evelyn said quietly. 15 years in the department, until last month. "Suspended," he corrected, his voice low. "They said paperwork errors." I knew it was because I'd started asking about Kate's property. He glanced up, eyes hard. Then I heard, "What happened to your witness?" Figured I'd be next. "Why now?" I asked. He set the mug down. "Because I've got nothing left they can take, and I'm done watching them chew up people like her." From his jacket pocket, he slid out a flash drive wrapped in a napkin, body cam footage. They thought they deleted it. They didn't know I keep backups off system. Shows 2 officers delivering 3 women to that house. Shows Rosselli taking an envelope from Kate's himself. Evelyn reached for it, but he didn't let go right away. "You leak this, they'll come for you harder than they came for me," he said. "Make sure it's worth it." Before she could answer, the bell over the diner door jingled. A man in a baseball cap walked in, ordered coffee to go. He didn't look at us, but his reflection in the window lingered too long. Navarro saw it too. "We've got company." Evelyn tucked the drive into her bag. We split up. "Marcus is outside, he'll run cover." We left cash on the table and walked out into the night. The air smelled like rain was coming. Marcus was leaning against a lamppost, hood up. He gave Navarro a once-over, then jerked his head toward a side street. 2 tails. Gray Caprice and a black SUV. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they decide who to follow." "Let them follow me," Navarro said. "If they're busy with me, you get the footage out." "That's suicide," I said. He gave a humorless smile. I was a dead man the moment I kept that backup. Before I could argue, he was walking toward the main road, hands in his pockets, shoulders loose like he had nowhere to be. The SUV's engine rumbled to life and rolled after him. Marcus grabbed my elbow. "Go." We cut through an alley, past dumpsters, and the sour stink of beer cans. The Caprice turned in at the far end, headlights sweeping the brick walls. We ducked into the back door of a laundromat, slipped out the front, and into Evelyn's car. She drove with both hands tight on the wheel, eyes on the mirrors. Back at her office, we locked the door and made 3 copies of Navarro's drive. 1 went to a safe deposit box. 1 went to an encrypted cloud account. The 3rd we kept for court. At 2:17 a.m., Evelyn's secure line rang again. This time it was Navarro's voice, rough and quick. "They made contact. Lost them in the train yard. Don't call this number again." Click. 2 hours later, the hearing began. The courtroom felt smaller this time, packed with reporters, community, activists, and more uniforms than before. Rosselli was there, his face as still as carved stone. Evelyn opened with the footage. The screen showed the grainy body cam view, 2 officers leading 3 women into the back room of the house, the women's hands bound. The camera swung, catching Rosselli in the doorway, envelope in hand. His voice was clear. "Make sure the van's ready by 8. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge's gavel came down hard. Rosselli's lawyer objected, demanded authenticity checks, claimed deep fake manipulation. Evelyn was ready. Chain of custody, metadata, timestamps. Every objection died under the weight of the facts. When my turn came to testify again, I spoke slowly, clearly. Every word felt heavier now, backed by more than just my voice. The jury's eyes were on me, but so were Rosselli's. There was no cold detachment this time, just something sharper. Like a blade waiting for a gap in the armor. The judge recessed for the day with a promise to reconvene tomorrow. Outside, the street was a wall of cameras and questions. I caught a glimpse of Marcus in the crowd, nodding once before disappearing. That night, back in Evelyn's office, she poured 2 fingers of whiskey into paper cups. "We're not done," she said. "But we're closer than they ever thought we'd get." I looked at the flash drive on the desk, at Ranger asleep by the door, at the rain streaking the window. Somewhere out there, Navarro was still moving, still breathing, still holding the line, and I knew whatever happened next. We'd already crossed the point of no return. The final day in court felt like walking into the eye of a storm. The gallery was so full people stood along the walls, pressed shoulder to shoulder. Community activists held signs outside. News crews lined the courthouse steps. Inside, the air was thick with that strange mix of anticipation and dread, like everyone knew something was about to end. But no one knew who it would end for. When the judge entered, the room rose as one. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to glance at the row of uniforms across the aisle. Evelyn's notes were neat in front of her, but her pen tapped once against the folder, a tell I'd learned meant. She was already 10 steps ahead in her mind. The prosecution replayed the body cam footage one last time, each second heavy as an anvil. Maria's voice echoed in my head even though it wasn't played today. A ghost threading through the evidence, like she refused to be erased. Then came the verdict. On the top charge, racketeering, guilty. On the charge of aiding human trafficking, guilty. On obstruction, guilty. The gavel came down, sharp as a gunshot. The room erupted, some in cheers, others in curses. Rosselli's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something I couldn't hear over the noise. Evelyn turned to me. "We got him." I nodded, but it didn't feel like victory. Not exactly. Because outside, I knew there were still others, officers whose names were in that notebook, whose faces never appeared on that footage. And Maria? She was still out there somewhere, maybe alive, maybe not. Her truth carried into this room by a stranger she'd met for less than an hour. When we stepped outside, the cameras closed in, microphones shoved toward my face. How does it feel to win? Someone shouted. I thought about that word, win. I thought about Navarro still moving through shadows, about Marcus keeping watch from street corners, about the photo of Ranger in my freezer. It's not about winning, I said finally. It's about surviving the fight long enough to make the truth louder than the lies. That night, Evelyn insisted I stay at her place one more time. We sat in her small kitchen, the hum of the fridge the only sound for a while. She poured tea instead of whiskey, both of us too tired for burn. "You going back to work?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not at the precinct. Not now. Maybe not ever." "What will you do?" I looked down at my hand, steady for the first time in weeks. "I'll still translate. Just not for them. Maybe for the people who never get a microphone in their face." She smiled, and for the first time it didn't feel like a defense. When I got back to my apartment the next day, Ranger bounded to the door, tail wagging like nothing in the world could go wrong. Marcus was across the street, leaning against the wall, eyes scanning traffic. He raised 2 fingers in a silent salute before walking away. In my freezer, the Polaroid was still there. I took it out, held it over the trash, then stopped. Instead, I tucked it into a box with my notes and the court transcripts. A reminder not of the threat, but of what it took to stand against it. That night, I opened the window and let the city sounds in: sirens, car horns, someone laughing too loud in the distance. Life going on. And in that moment, I realized the truth isn't a single thing you say once and keep forever. It's something you have to keep speaking over and over until it can't be buried again. I wasn't sure where I'd go next, but I knew this. I'd keep speaking because silence had almost killed us, and I'd learned how to survive the noise. In the end, she didn't just translate someone else's words. She became the voice they could never silence. The case was won. But the fight isn't over. Because the truth isn't something you speak once and keep forever. It's something you have to fight for every single day. And maybe that's the real victory, not that she survived the storm, but that she made the storm listen. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the kind of world we live in, then join us here. Subscribe. Be part of the people who refuse to stay quiet, because silence almost killed her.